Coming up on this week's show, were Nintendo planning the Switch back in 2006?
Pac-Man joins the Mile High Club.
And we go inside Bullfrog with Alex Trowers.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each week with our incredible friends at the amazing Bitmap Books. And keep listening if you're a fan of the Sega Master System. And check them out right now at bitmapbooks.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 265, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And welcome to this week's show where we take a bit of time out of modern life. I mean, thinking about what's been going on. I'm on a week off at the moment, but still, there's things to do around the house. We're going to take the dog out every day. Joe's just finished a big supermarket trip for about 2 hours.
I've been talking to the cat.
They're the highlights of our week. No, the highlight of our week is getting together and talking about retro games for an hour. That's the highlight of my week, really. Not going bloody shopping in Asda.
Definitely.
Reminiscing about those days when all you had to worry about in life was which game you're going to rent from Blockbuster this weekend. That's what this show is about. And of course, we take you behind the scenes of those games that you grew up playing as well, with a special guest on each week's show. Now, today, we're going to be talking about a legendary British gaming company. We're going to be going inside Bullfrog.
Yes, we're talking to Alex Trowers from Bullfrog. And, you know, Alex was involved in a lot of really big games. And we're talking like PowerMonger, Syndicate, Populous, and Magic Carpet. Magic Carpet was really a changing point in gaming, wasn't it? It was where they had that kind of 3D voxel landscape and you flew through it.
I've got loads of memories with Magic Carpet. I remember my brother putting the demo on a Magic Carpet and calling me like to come upstairs to come and see this game, because it was like, it's in 3D and we're flying around, and it was just like amazing. We had the demo of it, so we had to pick the game up. But he also worked on games like Theme Park and Theme Hospital as well, which is really cool.
Yeah, and Syndicate, which, you know, I'm a real big fan of Syndicate. Absolutely amazing game. And like you said, Populous, that was a very God kind of game. And so was PowerMonger. And, you know, Bullfrog were innovators in the God titles, but also they were run by Peter Molyneux, and Alex actually talks a lot about Peter Molyneux and about the whole kind of culture at Bullfrog. It's really interesting interview, this one.
Yeah, because we did an episode a couple of years ago with Glenn Corpus, who worked alongside Alex as well. So if you enjoyed this week's show, make sure you go back and check that one out too. That was a really good interview. But I mean, it is a company that, you know, there are probably only a handful of real legendary British gaming companies I can think of, and Bullfrog are definitely up there.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. You know what? It's really interesting as well, because of when I get involved in these interviews and stuff, like I'm like, as if they're British. Like as a kid, I just assumed they're always Japanese or American, but there's so many, just doing the podcast, there's so many amazing British, game companies and stuff. It's just amazing to find out about them all.
Yeah, so we're going to be joined by Alex Trowers on the Retro Hour podcast in around 20 minutes from now. You guys actually did this one, so we're looking forward to kicking back and checking out what Alex has got to say. He'll be on the show very soon. Now, we've actually got a PO box that we've set up as well. If you want to send us anything via snail mail, Ravi will jump on the bus and go and collect it.
Well, this is the thing. Because of COVID hours, they're opening up really early in the morning, and I've not got up that early in the morning for a long time.
Just stay up all night, Ravi.
Yeah, probably easier.
Falls asleep on the bus on the way there.
So I'm aiming to go and check it this month, which should be really interesting. And the PO box is the Retro Hour, PO Box 10926, Nottingham, NG 19NS, United Kingdom.
You know what? When you read out addresses like that, it always makes me think of like Saturday morning TV
Play days
when I was a kid. Yeah, we should do like competitions where you've got to send your answer on the back of a postcard.
Just go to your parents' wallet, take out £5.
You know what? I've got a really embarrassing story, because I used to draw pictures when I was a kid for like, you know, Nickelodeon and stuff. And I used to just post them with no envelope or anything, just post them in the letterbox, thinking that's how it worked. And my parents never stopped me.
You're only 18 when you did that, weren't you?
Yeah, that was only last year, mate.
The postman's bedroom's just full of all these Nickelodeon pictures.
Did you ever apply to go on TV shows?
My brother applied to go on Funhouse.
Wow.
And I remember as a kid, he used to always tell me that he did actually go on it with my cousin, but he never did.
I think I was on one. Oh God, they went round schools. It was called like It's a Bitzer or something like that. It was on.
I vaguely remember it.
Yeah, it was on like the BBC. in the really early days, and they used to have all these. I think it was like they'd bring this mad device, and they'd be like, "Oh, it's a bit." So I've got very distant memories of it, and yeah, don't try and look through and find tapes.
I applied to go on. Well, Nightmare didn't go on any of that.
Yeah.
And do you remember Finders Keepers with Neil Buchanan?
Yeah.
Where you said trash the house and have to find things in the rooms.
I was about to say, is that the one where I vaguely remember kids pulling all the drawers out of like wardrobes and stuff like that?
It made newspaper headlines because they'd like, there was a bit Room Raiders, wasn't it? Where you go and like wreck all the rooms, and they were like, kids are just going to go to houses and trash them. And it's like, they know the difference.
Well, you say that. Me and my brother used to play it around the house. So maybe
and then play clean up afterwards.
Just in your mum's bedroom, just like,
yes, we did. So unfortunately, it never got on that. But we've now got our own PO box. If you want to send us things, what kind of stuff are people going to send us? Like what, arcade cabinets, massive 14 CRTs for Ravi to carry back
please
on the
don't
bus?
send anything big, but just anything you find interesting. Yeah, and the reason we've kind of opened it is because we're trademarked now. So we had to open it to get a trademark registered. So we've got it. So we're like, why not put it out to the listeners?
Yeah, so if you want to send us any interesting items, that's the address for Ravi to collect it. So we're going to be joined by Alex very soon. Before that, of course, we update you on what's been happening in the world of retro gaming over the last 7 days. Let's start with a story about the Nintendo DS. Now, you might be thinking, not all that retro, but actually came out in 2006.
Yeah,
we're definitely getting there.
No, the DS Lite came out in 2006.
Right,
the original DS was, I want to say 2004, could be 2005. People screaming at me right now. But yeah, I mean, that's 2005, still, 2006, sorry, still 15 years ago. But yeah, this is really interesting. So Beta64 shared this on Twitter, that essentially Lost Nintendo History, the team there, have hacked the DS Lite. I'm not too sure, the article doesn't say what they did to it, but they've hacked it. But they found unused data in there, that there was an ability to essentially put the DS onto your TV. So, you could play DS games on your TV, essentially like the Switch. Absolutely no explanation to why, it was there or why it wasn't used or anything like that. But it just kind of begs to think the question of, when Nintendo thinking of this, thinking of this technology and stuff like that, thinking about this all the way back, because they would have been making the DS Lite in 2005, I imagine, to come out in 2006. But yeah.
It's interesting. They seem to have made a little custom board. Mm-hmm. And this board... you need to flash the custom hardware onto your DS, and then that will enable the TV out, and then you can go from the DS into the board and then out. Like, I think, can you use external controllers with the DS? Like,
I don't think you
Not
can.
that I know of,
I don't think you can. In the picture, they've got like a Switch controller, haven't they, there? A Pro controller, but I don't think you can do that.
Because I'm just thinking, like, maybe there's a whole third-party market that used to do this. That's kind of just now been destroyed. Like adapters that would hook it up to your television. I'm not that clued in on this, but it seems like they've actually created a little board, and this board, people could start printing it, and it may actually become a thing.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, funny enough, it was actually discovered by somebody else a year ago. But it's only since Beta64 has tweeted it, this last kind of, I think it literally tweeted it a couple of days ago on the 22nd of February. So just over a week ago now. That's where it's kind of blowing up and people are learning about it and stuff like that. But I think, Nintendo probably missed the trick there, personally. I mean, could you do it with the PSP? Could you do that with the PSP?
Well, they're saying it's got a digital to analog converter in it. So basically, it's a proper analog signal coming out of the DS Lite, and then it gets amplified and then delivered via composite video. So it's not going to be the most amazing quality.
Yeah.
But, you're thinking you've got that tiny screen and you're actually blowing that up onto a big television as well.
Well, I think the biggest issue is, I mean, it kind of does prove that Nintendo have been thinking about the hybrid thing for a while. But the big problem with the DS is you've got two screens.
I was literally about to say, I wonder if the reason they scrapped it is because of the two screens. Or I wonder if they had in mind, one of the screens is up on the TV and then the screen down, in your hands kind of thing.
Like the Wii U.
Yeah, like the Wii U essentially maybe. But I don't know. I don't know where they were going with it, or if, you know, when people emulate the DS, you just have both screens, you know, when you watch like a review or something and people play it on emulation, both screens are kind of on there. Maybe they were going to do something like that.
And not all games support both screens, do they? But like some, it's just dead, like the other screen is, or it's not got.
Yeah, I think there's only a couple of games like that, and they're usually like re-releases of Game Boy Advance games or Super Nintendo games. You know, what they ported over, or N64 games.
And it seems that you have to download this thing called the Twilight menu as well, which is a kind of hacking thing, and you'll need a flash card for it, and you know, so it does require a lot of kind of playing about, but they may get it a lot slicker in the future.
Yeah,
I do like hearing about, you know, like hidden features inside systems that, you know, weren't actually used at the time. I remember hearing about the fact that there was an FM radio built into, I think it was the iPhone 3G, that was just there on the board and they never used it. Yeah, so.
Oh wow, I had an iPhone 3G.
Yeah, it was never enabled. Yeah, it was in there.
The radios are interesting because there was this like, you know, these Sony Walkman digital players for like FLAC and stuff like that, and higher quality, high resolution audio players. And sometimes the radios aren't enabled because there's different laws in different areas. But you can like update the firmware, hack them a bit, and it's kind of like retroactively finding something and then you know, finding a feature and adding it yourself. I quite like that too. Yeah.
Well, I guess if the companies have gone to the effort of actually designing it, I guess it's probably more expensive to actually redesign it and take that feature off the board than just disable it.
Yeah, rather than just like turn it off, you know, with a little configuration thing.
Now let's talk about Lego. I mean, you know, whatever age you are, Lego's still fun, isn't it? I will admit I'm actually not the best person to talk about Lego. I don't know if I mentioned this on the show before. My missus got me a Back to the Future DeLorean Lego set back in, I think it was 2011 that I still haven't finished yet.
That's so like typical Dan. That I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I quite like Lego, and when I went to Florida a couple of years ago, there was a few Lego shops there, and I bought like loads of Star Wars Lego, and I'm not like I bought like 4 sets, and I've only built like 2 of them, but not because I'm bob at it, just because I've not had the time to do it yet.
Well, my mate Peter Chu, Pete, if you're listening, wicked Lego collection back in the days. He used to have a whole society in his bedroom with like satellites going across, and like, oh, it was absolutely amazing. I was a bit of a Lego addict, I was.
Well, if he's still got his Lego society, he can make a Green Hill Zone Sonic in there, you know, from this year, hopefully.
Yeah.
This is really cool. You actually sent me this a couple of weeks ago, didn't you, Ravi, when it was still just a kind of a petition, an idea, but essentially, from what I understand, Lego have a website called like Ideas Lego, like LegoIdeas.com or IdeasLego.com. But essentially, it's where people who are like super Lego fans can submit ideas they've had or, you know, sets they've made from other sets. And this is one by a Lego fan called Viv Granell, I believe it is. And what she's done is she's made the Sonic Mania Sonic Green Hill Zone with Sonic, Dr. Robotnik, the little bad guy robots from Sonic Mania. You know, you've got some of the enemies in there, and you've got like the wheel spin and everything like that. It hit its target of 10,000 votes, so it's actually happening, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, this idea. So because people have been able to design the Lego with like 3D programs, you know, so you've got every piece available, which you probably didn't have when you were younger.
Yeah,
because it's massively expensive, still is. They can create these wonderful things. Like Perifractic had one, which was his Brixty 64, which was an actual Commodore 64. That was built out of Lego, and the keyboard worked and everything. But that didn't become an idea. But I think it's like they kind of just choose the public as the designer.
Yeah.
And then that happens. And like the Minecraft Lego was really popular as well. So it's good to see this Sonic one.
Yeah, well it's like the Nintendo Lego has been really popular as well, hasn't it? You know, all the Mario stuff, and then obviously the actual Nintendo console as well. But interestingly, obviously it's the 30th anniversary of Sonic this year in June. So I wonder if they're going to try and kind of like, you know, coincide it with that. It will come out in June or something, because they've not said when it'll be out other than this year. But it's I find it interesting that this is kind of, you know, oh yeah, it was this Sonic set, you know, people can vote for, and then they're like, oh yeah, it's the 30th anniversary of Sonic. Like it fits in a little bit too nicely. But my only issue with it, as you said, Ravi, it's always so flipping expensive. It's so cool, but it's like, They're always like £150 for these like big sets, aren't they?
Yeah, like I know some people that are into vintage Lego collecting.
Oh gosh, yeah.
They have like the old ones from the 80s, and those full kits go for thousands. You know, it's absolutely mad. Yeah,
maybe Dan can use his DeLorean and go back and get us a few sets.
It's rare now, Dan.
My DeLorean will be retro by the time I build it, probably. But you're right though about the prices. I remember the Ghostbusters Firehouse when they brought that out. You know, that was like a massive, probably about like 1.5 meters high Lego Firehouse I brought out a few years ago. And I think I've got a feeling that was like about 300 or 400 quid over here. It was like really expensive.
The Death Star one that I always see is like 500 quid or something. It's just crazy. You know, I wanted the Nintendo one, and I think that was like 180 quid or something, like something mad like that. I could be wrong, but
go for Mega Blocks.
Mega Blocks.
We did actually see the Ghostbusters one in a Lego shop in Milan.
Oh, really?
When we were on holiday, and it was like €250, and I was like, "Can I bring that back on the plane?" I was like, "Probably not." So yeah, didn't get it. Then again, the amount of time it took me to build that DeLorean, I wouldn't fancy my chances. Let's get into a bit of PC gaming. I mean, you know, back in the day when 3D became the norm, there was one series of graphics cards that, of course, everyone wanted back then. That was the 3DFX Voodoo range. Now, it turns out there was, if I'm not mistaken, the last one in the range, the Voodoo 5 6000, that was meant to be kind of the top end of the 3DFX Voodoo range that didn't actually get released in the end because it was around that time I think Nvidia took over them and it didn't get released. But now a fan has actually made his own Voodoo 5 6000.
Yeah, he's actually reversed engineered it, and it's an exact copy, and this is totally mental. I heard This Week in Retro, Neil was talking about this, and he seems to be a really big Voodoo fan. Like, I was into those graphics cards, but you're right, when the other people entered the market, suddenly Voodoo was kind of priced out. Now, these cards do get extremely hot, and as you can see, they've got like 4 huge fans and heat sinks on there. It's quite a beast, isn't it?
So is this all original parts then, or is this kind of modern parts?
Oh, it's all modern parts, but it's all based on the old one, so... with new components, a new PCB reversed engineered. Now, I don't know if the company still exists, because this is kind of like you're releasing a project that was a bit of a concept, and you're putting it out there as a kind of working piece of hardware. Yeah, it's quite interesting to see reverse engineering of things. You know, maybe one day we'll see a reversed engineered M2 or if people can get all the details. I wonder how he got them, and you can see that this card actually requires a Molex connector as well. So it's one of these ones where you'd have to plug in some extra power as well, which was kind of standard in graphics cards now, but back then it really wasn't done that much.
Yeah, it's got 16 times. It's actually quite a lot of power on here. Looking at it, 128 megabytes of RAM, which for the 90s, I mean, God, graphics cards back then. I think mine was like my first PC had like a 4 megabyte graphics card or something in it.
Yeah, if you're running like Windows 98, then you really don't need all this power. But this is like it's like the Ferrari, isn't it? It's like the real high end one, and I guess these PC gamers and real Voodoo fans really wanted this for a long time. So I don't know. Do you think he's going to be selling it on, or he's just going to make a one-off? Or
well, like you said, I mean, you know, the assets of 3DFX were sold to Nvidia, so I guess they own all the trademarks and everything now. So whether he needs, I'd imagine to sell them, you're going to need permission from them. I mean, I guess the most sensible thing to do will probably be to just kind of open source it and people can build their own. You know, I imagine NVIDIA would probably turn a blind eye to that, but I imagine if he was selling them commercially, you would need a license to use the trademarks at least.
Because it's saying, you know, it's the exact performance. It's got the same BIOS and the same drivers as well. So maybe there'd be a few issues with BIOS and stuff like that. But yeah, it does look interesting. And these PCI cards... were really quite nice.
I do like the fact that people are kind of taking on projects for things that never got released back in the day. Like I saw on, you know, that Amiga 1200 CD-ROM drive. That CD 1200. There's like a group of guys in Australia who are kind of, wanting to make their own version of that and putting it out there as well. And like you said, I mean, there are people in the Jaguar community who are making things that were, rumored in magazines back in the day that never got released. So it would be cool if more of these kind of things came out. I mean, like you said, the 3DO M2. That would be amazing if, a group got together and actually maybe a crowdfunding kind of thing, to finally get these bits of technology that we all drooled over back in the day that never made it to market finally out there.
I guess it's getting as much documentation, information, and someone who's a complete expert in this. Maybe if they could get someone who was actually involved in the project at the time, they may be able to do stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, speaking of reverse engineering, it doesn't always go to plan. Story here about Grand Theft Auto. Take-Two have DMCA take down the reverse engineered GTA source code.
Yeah, so this is absolutely amazing. This is GTA 3, and they've reversed engineered this, and also Vice City. And they're all kind of based on the same code base. What they've done is they've gone through and they've generated tons of code based on analysing the original code, but also they've taken all the assets out of the game. So, you've got the road images, you've got the music, you've got everything that's kind of owned by Take-Two. So Take-Two would obviously want to take this down, but the great thing about this is it's spawned a lot of projects. So there's the Wii U version now, which has been created of GTA 3. Which is called Re-GTA 3, and that's based on this code as well. So that's actually getting done at the moment, and it's pretty mad to see GTA 3, kind of classic title, coming to the Wii U. But also, there was a release for the Switch. Now, the Switch version, Modern Vintage Gamer did a video on, and actually, they've managed to port San Andreas. So what they've done is they've used this code base, but they've put the San Andreas assets in there. And that's now kind of available for homebrewed versions. They're a bit buggy, but, that's going to get changed and developed over time. I don't know if these projects are going to have to be a bit stealthy, though, because seeing that the main reversed engineered project's been taken down, these little ports, I don't know if they're going to be stealthy. The Wii U one's probably going to slip through because no one really cares about the Wii U at the moment. But if you think they'd want to probably make some money out of releasing San Andreas on the Switch, and having an alternative version could be really, really hard. Recently there was a whole scene of modding online mods for GTA, and someone did one for GTA 5, and they really, really they got pursued in court and kind of taken down by Take-Two as well, which I don't know. It kind of seems a bit unfair because there's been titles like Multi Theft Auto, San Andreas, multiplayer that pioneered GTA Online, and now that they've bothered to do it themselves, they start kind of attacking the modders and the groups, which I don't know. It doesn't really seem in GTA ethics to me. It kind of had that Doom philosophy when you very first started, which was mod everything, go mad. But now it's mod what we tell you to mod on Steam, or
I think with this kind of thing, it's very much, there's obviously a fine line with trademarks and copyright. And I know there is, if you cover a song, if you do a cover version of a song, that's generally all right. But if you sample the original song, then it's not. So I guess it depends kind of how much, if they've made a game that's based on it and actually done their own code from scratch, I imagine that's more likely to legally be allowed than actually taking source code from the original game. And then I know there is rules in certain countries where copyright owners are required to protect their IPs, otherwise they lose them.
Yeah, also I just missed out that they'd also ported San Andreas to the Vita as well, which was really interesting.
What do you think, these games now, I mean, we can't be far off the 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
Of those, I mean, when did GTA 3 come out? Was that 2001?
I think, I just remember it was XP Service Pack 2 when GTA 3 was out. And talking of those voodoo cards, if you ran GTA on one of them, it would have been absolutely amazing.
GTA 3 came out on the 22nd of October 2001.
Right.
So it's coming up to 20 years.
Well, that makes me think that maybe the reason they're taking down these projects is, they're planning on doing something themselves. Maybe like actually doing HD remasters, which, would obviously, I imagine, would earn them a lot of money.
I have a Switch. Is there like a GTA pack on the Switch with all of them? If they did GTA 3, Vice City and San Andreas, that could be huge.
Yeah, I imagine how many of them would sell.
Yeah.
So that to me is like, it makes sense that if you owned the Grand Theft Auto franchise, and obviously that is the biggest franchise, not only in gaming, but probably in entertainment as well, isn't it? The amount of copies that game
what I think the problem is? I think the problem is that it's on consoles. If it was on PC, it would have been left alone and they would have just left the modders to do it and kind of play with it. Because that's what they do. Like there's a whole community of replacing the assets with photorealistic stuff, updating it. There's even a modding community for Red Dead Redemption. But yeah, I think because it's getting ported onto other consoles and stuff, it starts to affect their market.
Well, you just watch. I bet there's going to be 20th anniversary releases coming out. It's got to happen.
The GTA triple pack for the Switch.
Yeah, or if they didn't have that idea, they probably have now.
Yeah.
Now, before we get into our chat with Alex Trowers, obviously now the summer's kind of approaching. We're all hoping that maybe it won't be too long until we can get on planes and start traveling around. It looks like, though, the in-flight experience might be improved somewhat for us retro gaming fans, as there is a new partnership with Panasonic and Bandai Namco, who are going to be bringing retro games to the back of an airplane seat near you.
Now, this caught my eye because when I went to Japan, I can't remember who I flew with there, but I definitely flew back with like Air Japan. You could play Pac-Man on the plane there and back, but it was amongst like a compilation of like really bad, I can only describe it as like homebrew DVD games, like DVD menu games. And this Pac-Man game played terribly. Like you had to play it with like a TV remote. So I'd much rather play it like a proper arcade port version of it brought to you by Namco Bandai. But yeah, this is interesting because, like I say, it's been done before, but hopefully they're going to do it. They're going to do it properly this time.
I'll tell you what, I was on a Virgin flight coming back from America, and one of them big double-decker planes. And, there was this thing where you could just message anyone in any seat.
Yeah.
It was so creepy. It was like, you're fit. Like where's that come from?
Well, interesting you say that. I was playing Pac-Man against my wife, like when we were going out to Japan. But what's cool about this is they're saying, they're bringing like a whole library of games, but they've kept that under wraps. So far, they've just said, Pac-Man, Dig Dug, and Battle City.
And Gallagher as well, apparently.
Is it Gallagher as well? But yeah, apparently there's going to be like a whole library of games. So, they've not said anything about like, the controller or anything like that, but that would be really cool if you got like a little arcade stick or like a USB SNES controller or something to play them with.
Well, Sega also have a history of gaming on planes, don't they, Joe?
Yeah, they do. I was like, do they? They do.
Tell me more.
They do, because it was me who told you earlier on.
Yeah.
Is it it's the Sega Megajet, isn't it?
Sega Megajet, yeah.
In the early 90s was essentially a portable Genesis, wasn't it? Which, you could plug into the TV screens, in the back of the headrests and stuff on Japanese airlines in like 92, 93, which is kind of where the Nomad came from as well. So it's interesting that it's coming full circle. Like, I know 90s fashion is in quite a lot at the moment, the young'uns, but just seems to be like 90s gaming.
Do you think it's going to be like, that show Clarissa, where you can change your clothes on it and just, it's like a real 90s computer on the plane?
That'd be amazing. You'd probably just go on the plane just for that on the trip.
I just want a round the road trip and then just land back at home just to play some games.
What I would love to see is, they say it's Bandai Namco, I'd love it to see if they'd like do a partnership with like, Ryanair. So when you go into Magaluf, you're playing a bit of Gallagher on the back of the plane, going on a stag do or something.
I'm just reading this mad little line, which is a retro gamer stated in 2006 July that the majority of megajets are owned by private collectors came from a shipment that was hijacked by Indonesian sea pirates.
Brilliant.
Which is wow.
If you buy in a Sega Mega Chat on eBay and you see that it's listed in Indonesia, it's like the selling
They're proper
area.
They're proper pirates, aren't they? Sea pirates.
Yeah.
The original pirates.
Yeah.
Crazy. That's crazy, man.
I do think it's amazing, though, that it just kind of proves how mainstream retro gaming is becoming now. The fact that it's going to be kind of bundled into in-flight entertainment systems. I mean, again, like you said, it depends what the controller is going to be like. I've got a feeling that the fact that these are kind of touch screens on the back of a seat, it's probably going to be like an on-screen kind of touchscreen joystick.
Either
I
that,
imagine.
or the little headphone jack on the side of like your armrest, and it's just got the up and down on it. I'm playing Pac-Man, but I can only go up and down.
Do you think it's going to be the equivalent of kicking the seat, though? Like hammering Pac-Man really hard with your finger,
God.
and then the guy in front going like, "Stop bloody playing."
Yeah, when you die, you smash the back of his seat in frustration. Yeah, that could cause some arguments, I imagine. So, yeah, very cool. Keep retro gaming out there, It's nice to see it getting into new places, and fingers crossed we'll be on a plane again before long. Now, before we get into our chat with Alex Trowers, just time to give a massive thank you to our amazing friends at Bitmap Books, who, of course, bring you the Retro Hour podcast each and every week. And if you're a fan of the Sega Master System, now you and I actually, Joe, both own a copy of this brilliant book. This is Sega Master System, a visual compendium.
Yeah, man, you actually got me this for Christmas a couple of years ago, and I find myself always picking this game up in the games room. It's really, really awesome. It's got over 420 pages of just different, all the artwork from all different games. There's over 150 different games here as well. And what I really like is just the little articles, just a couple of paragraphs, nothing crazy, nothing like 7 pages about Alex the Kid or anything like that. It is literally just like 2 pages on it. And it's just a real easy, just pick up and read. I'm not a smart guy. It's got lots of nice big pictures, and it also comes with a really, really cool, it comes with 3D glasses as well. So actually some of the pictures are in 3D, which is really cool, which actually you can hear there as well. So, and it's
like a hologram, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a hologram cover, and, you get
old
the Sega 3D.
Style.
Yeah, proper old school style. And, it's the red and blue Sega, proper Sega glasses as well, which is really awesome.
So if you're a fan of the Master System, it covers the most iconic games on the system: Alex Kidd, Fantasy Zone Shinobi, Fantasy Star as well. Around 200 games covered. Like you said, the focus is their visuals, and it gives you little sound bites and anecdotes and memories as well. And really, it's just a celebration of that incredible platform. Weirdly, I haven't got a Master System in my collection. That is a real oversight. I can play them on my Mega Drive, but I think I do need to add one to my collection now. Have you got one?
I've got the Master System one, the black and red one, the wide one.
Oh, that's the best one.
It doesn't fit in my games cabinet, because it's really wide. So it's in a drawer, which is kind of disappointing. So I should probably pick up a Master System 2, because that one's obviously a bit smaller.
Yeah, and then you get Alex Kidd built into that, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
Is that very cool? Yeah, that was an amazing machine. So if you're a fan of it, there are a load of contributions as well from experts on the scene and journalists and people that were involved in the games. And so many games included. If you're a fan of the Sega Master System, you need to check out a visual compendium, and you can get it by heading to our sponsor's website, bitmapbooks.co.uk. And thank you to our very good friends at Bitmap Books. Now, of course, we have a Patreon running at the moment. We actually just did our latest episode of our patrons' exclusive podcast, the Retro Hour After Hours, where at the weekend we took a little trip back to the year 1999. That was a giggle.
Oh yeah, got so many memories of just bad fashion.
We ended up
cool
talking about
movies.
Greb culture and Tony Hawk's, didn't we?
yeah. But also gaming as well, because there was so many good games there. It was unbelievable. You think the amount of FPSs that came out, but also the amount of groundbreaking titles. It was a real change in time, and of course the Matrix.
And a load of great games out in that year. We're talking about the Dreamcast, we're talking about the upcoming PlayStation 2, reliving the terror that was the Millennium Bug all over again, and hearing about, Ravi's days as a skater boy. That was quite amusing. If you want to hear more about that, you can check out our exclusive Patrons podcast by backing us on Patreon, and a few other perks as well. You get the normal show early most weeks as well. You get it ad-free. Really, though, you're just doing it to show your support to this podcast and ensure that we can continue doing it week in, week out. We have said that over the last couple of weeks, that really having Patreon save this show. Because I was thinking before, actually, because we used to record it in a studio that wasn't ours. We could just get in there, out of hours during the week. And there was always a concern that one day we might not be allowed in there, how we're going to do the show. And obviously that happened when lockdown came in. But thanks to our patrons, we invested in kit. We've converted our bedrooms at home, our spare rooms into studios, and we can do the show no matter what's going on in our life now or wherever we are.
And it's helped with flexibility as well, because if you think about it, we had to go to the studio at set times and we had to do it when we can, and Dan would sneak us in the back and it would be like now we've got any time that we can kind of do it. And
we used to do it on a Wednesday night from like 8 till midnight, didn't we?
Yeah,
we'd always try and knock out like 2 or 3 episodes, and it was just always like a mammoth task, but we did it every week. But this has been so much nicer. We still do it on a Wednesday, but we do it at like 4 o'clock now, don't we? And it's just so much better. And we can't thank people enough for letting this happen.
And it's kept me sane as well. It's the fun that I have in the week, other than talking with the cat. He doesn't reply much, so.
And Ravi can do the show in his Spider-Man pajamas now as well.
Yes.
So, we really appreciate you investing in this kit. And of course, we have ongoing costs all the time. So our Patreon goes back into the running of the show. And of course, you will get a mention in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Like this week, thank you very much to Matthias Sundling,
Jeremy Rayner,
Gary Nutting,
Darren Coles,
and Ollie Dean,
who all made donations into our Patreon. That is massively appreciated. Thank you so much, guys. And if you'd like to do the same, you'll find the link on our website, along with everything else that we've talked about in this week's show at theretrohour.com. I did spot as well that we got a few nice new reviews on Apple Podcasts, because I know we mentioned that recently. We had a few nice ones come in over the last few weeks, which were always appreciated as well. Someone did say they had trouble finding how to review a podcast on the Apple Podcast app, because you've got to scroll down about like 4 or 5 pages to get to it.
They don't make it easy, do they? They've always been a bit rubbish with podcasts and stuff, and they kind of have the crown, don't they, Apple?
Yeah, a lot of people are like, well, I haven't got an iPhone or whatever. Whatever platform you can leave a review on always helps. But I think, the Apple Podcast chart is kind of the official, top of the pops chart of podcasts. So if you can find it in your heart to leave us a nice little review on there, that always gets us in front of new people. So it's a really easy way to help out the show. Right then, we'll have more news for you next Friday. And now we're going to take you inside Bullfrog, games like Syndicate, PowerMonger, Populous, Magic Carpet, and lots more as well, with this week's special guest, Alex Trowers, next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we are joined by Alex Trowers. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Excellent. And, we always start this with a question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, what was your first gaming experience? Do you kind of remember the first time you saw a video game or really got addicted to one?
So I think my uncle had a BBC, and I think we used to get him to fire stuff on that. But the one that really sticks with me is, and I can't even remember who it was. I think it was a cousin or somebody. They had a Spectrum, and we played, I think it was Pterodactyl 4D on it, and Jumping Jack as well. And so those were probably the 2 first video games that I ever actually played. And I can remember thinking, hey, this is really, really cool, because you get that kind of that sort of disconnect of I press these things here and that thing on the screen moves, and that was really, really exciting to us.
You were a big Dungeons and Dragons fan, and with many developers, do you think computing owes a lot to Dungeons and Dragons?
I think there's a lot of crossover, and certainly the role-playing game genre would not exist were it not for Dungeons and Dragons, and I mean both pen and paper and video. I mean, I can remember, we got into Dungeons and Dragons in, I think it was about 78, 79, so it hadn't long been out. And we were living in Guildford at the time, and I was like 7 or 8. And there was a game shop in town, and it was a model shop, but they also sold all sorts of board games. And my dad was a big gamer. He's probably the single biggest reason why I'm into gaming at all. And every weekend or every other weekend, we would go to this shop and we'd pick out a new game that we were all going to play and come back and play it. And one day he'd gone in there and he was like, I've tried most of these things. And the guy behind the counter was like, well, this has just come out. This is new, Dungeons and Dragons. You should try that. And so he picked up the basic set, the old red box, and he brought it back. And he said to me and my brother, right, go do the washing up. And then in half an hour, I'll have read the rules and we'll be ready to play. And we came back half an hour later and he's like, well, yes.
Come back next week.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so. That was on the Friday, and I think by the Sunday we'd actually rolled up some characters and maybe had a bit of a go. But it was such a paradigm shift in anything we'd ever experienced, to the point that eventually we kind of became D&D evangelists.
Yeah.
So Dad, who was a teacher, and he was big into his drama and everything. So he was always the GM, and he would always do, whenever he read us Lord of the Rings, he would do all the voices, and so he loved being the dungeon master. Right, this was practically his calling. So he would prepare a couple of adventures, and he would just keep them in the car. Literally in the car with the books. And when we'd go around people's houses, somehow he would manage to steer the conversation into D&D. And then he'd get the people interested and then be like, well, I've got it in the car. We could just have a quick game if you wanted. And then so me and my brother would be kind of essentially their guides. Like we would have our characters and we'd show them how the mechanics worked and everything. And then we'd all start just playing D&D at random people's houses. And there was always it's very easy to see now, but there was that moment when you know that you had them. And that's when these people who'd never experienced anything like this before, it's when they change from my elf opens that door to I open that door, and then the other guy's going, no, if you touch that door after what happened last time, then I'm gonna tackle you to the ground, and they really, really, really got into it, and it was just great traveling around converting people. And
so he was kind of like a D&D pusher.
Absolutely. Getting that, first one's free. Every now and again we'd get messages back from these people saying, I've just bought the box set.
He was like a traveling D&D salesman and he didn't even know.
Did he get any commission at all?
No, I've spoken to Ian Livingston about this before in the past, and I think I'm owed something, or at least Dad is, definitely. We certainly did our part in our tiny circle. But yeah.
Well, what was your first computer and how did you kind of get into programming then?
So my first computer, like many things, you should never send your parents out to get you a thing. When you're a kid, never send your parents out to get you a thing, because they will get you the wrong thing. So my friends had Spectrums. I think one of them had a C64 and a couple of the kids from school had BBCs. What I ended up with was a TI-994/A. And you couldn't get anything for it. And even those, do you remember those books, those Teach Yourself Programming, the Better Basic, and all of those ones with the little robots and the listings inside them? None of those would work on my computer, and it was very, very upsetting because I'd see all these games and I think, and I just typed that in and I couldn't get it to work, and so I was very, very frustrating time. Eventually, like many, many years later, when I was just before I joined Bullfrog, I was at this company on work placement, and I noticed one of these books on the shelf, and I said, I used to have those. And the CEO of the company, whose office it was, he just goes, I wrote them. I wrote all of those books. And I'm like, what? And here he was teaching me how to program as part of his company, and in effect he'd actually been teaching me to program my whole life. It was very, very weird. But yeah, so that's kind of where I started. Eventually I got a Spectrum, and I loved the Spectrum. The amount of programming I did on it was minimal, because obviously I'd discovered games by then, and it was all just, what games can I play on this thing, which was probably my major calling.
And was this assembly?
No, this is on the Spectrum. It was just basic. I do remember trying to learn machine code. My mate Scott, he had a Spectrum as well, and he started taking up machine code, but he got a lot further with it than I ever did. He's going to crop up again later, that guy, you watch.
And did you see gaming as a career? And what were your first steps getting into that?
No, absolutely not. Gaming wasn't a career. Don't be silly. Go out and get a proper job. That was the thing. There's that. I love how it's come full circle, but there was that Far Side cartoon, wasn't it?
I say it's a sports now, isn't it?
and yeah, the parents looking down at the kid and seeing the wanted ads for people who can save the princess and what have you, and the big money that can be made, and they're like, yes, this is brilliant. And it was satire then, but oh boy, it's not now, is it?
No, not at all.
Yeah, so no, I didn't even know that game design or game development was a thing. Like, I hadn't made that connection at all, that somebody had to be making these and getting paid to do so.
Well, were you aware of Bullfrog before, and were you playing any of their titles?
So, and this is where Scott comes back into play. At some point, Scott got an Atari ST, and we were in sixth form of school, and we used to bunk off whatever the last period was to go around his house and play Populous. And that's how I discovered Bullfrog, because there was this game that was unlike any other game that I'd ever played before in my life. Like, you weren't a character, you were an influence, and you couldn't tell people what to do. You could only kind of hint at what you wanted them to do. And it was an interesting world to watch, and the altering the landscape, the mechanics of that was just fun. There was a cadence to it. It was relaxing. It was very therapeutic. It was like a sort of colouring book, for want of a better term. There was a compulsion to it.
And it was like a board game, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's like, here's the environment, here's the board, and that's your means of interacting with the little pieces that were doing their own things. So I absolutely loved that. But yeah, that was my introduction to Bullfrog the product. Also in town was this other game shop called Ultima, where again you can trace a lot of ex-Bullfrog people to that shop in particular. Either they were hanging out in that shop or they actively worked there. And so I used to go there after school and hang out, and that's where I would meet Kevin and Glenn. So I knew those two before I knew of Bullfrog, really. So the question, obviously, one of the questions I always get asked is, so how did you get started? How did you get started in the industry? And before I answer that, I have to say that I in no way endorse this method of starting in the industry. If this is your aim, then this is the wrong way to be doing it. But yeah, so I knew those guys. I was, after school, when I left school, I had no idea what it was that I wanted to do. Something in cartoons, I was thinking. I had no real qualifications at all. No A-levels. I ended up on the iTech course, which was basically a YTS scheme back then. Now, the irony, and this is where I ended up at that other place with the guy who wrote those books before. And so I was learning C, learning a little bit of programming there. And they were really nice. It was really good fun. The course itself was terrible, like utterly, utterly terrible. They were teaching us outdated things. Nobody who was there really wanted to be there. The only good thing that they did, and this was a brilliant thing, was to get us placements at proper companies. And good placements as well. Like, it wasn't just you're going to go there and make the tea. It's you're going to go there and do your apprenticeship as a coder and that sort of stuff. So that was really, really good. And it just so happens that this was the place that Sean went to, like a couple of years previously, or he was like 1 year ahead of me, I think. Mm-hmm. And we happened to live in the same town. We were both living over in Farnham at the time, so we would be on the same bus. So I got to know Sean a little bit. And I said what I was doing, and he's like, "Oh, that's pretty cool. But why don't you come in and see us? Because we're always looking for people." So I did. I came in. I met Peter. We were chatting, and he was saying, so what do you want to do? Do you like games? I love games. I used to play this. I used to play Populous. I think it's brilliant. And he was getting quite excited, and he said, "Okay, yes. So when could you start?" And I said, "Well, give me like 2 weeks to square it with the other guys, because they'd been really good to me and I don't want to mess them around." And he goes, "Oh, cool. That sounds really good." So I left there. And when I went back to work, I told them, I said, "Listen, look, I've had this offer and it's games and it's something that I'm really interested in." And they were like, "Oh, no, please don't go. Whatever they're offering, we'll match it." And I'm like, "Look, you guys are brilliant, but this is something I think I have to do. It's something I'd really, really like to try." And they were like, "Okay, well, we're sorry to see you go, but we understand." And so 2 weeks later, I turn up at the office and I sit down, and Peter eventually comes in. Like, none of them really started work until about 10. So Peter eventually comes in, takes one look at me and goes, "What are you doing here? I never offered you the job." And that's when I realized that he hasn't, but he has a very a very special way of talking that makes you think that he says stuff when maybe he perhaps hasn't, or
Right.
he's agreeing to things that maybe perhaps he doesn't. So I kind of walked out of there in a daze, having packed in my other job, and I went round the corner to this board game shop. It was called Alien Encounters, and I went in there and I said to the owner, I said, "Look, I think I've made a terrible mistake." And he was like, "Don't worry about it. I've got just the thing." Reached up on the shelf, pulled down a box copy of Talisman, and we sat down and we played Talisman all day.
Oh God, Talisman's such a good game. I was addicted to that back in the days. You've just given me a big wave of nostalgia there.
But then, obviously, so I had to go home at some point and explain to my dad that I'd just made this god awful mistake. And he was like, "Well, you've got to go back. You've got to go back and get your job back. What else are you going to do? You've got to go and do that." And I was like, "No. This is something that I want to do. I reckon I could make a living at this." And so essentially what happened was I went on the dole for like 6 months. Now, during that period, every now and again, I'd get a call from Peter, and they'd be looking for somebody to come in and play the game, try out the game, or they'd have journalists coming over, so they wanted to make the office look busy or anything like that. And I would be his first call. There were a number of us, actually. There were a number of kind of Bullfrog adjacent people, Bullfrog kind of hangers on, like me and Jonty Barnes, for instance, or AD Moore. And we were all kids who eventually ended up working there. And after about 6 months or so, the guy who had the job that I would ultimately end up getting left and moved to the States. Now, funny enough, he was a guy who I was also at school with, at the same school with. But he left, and I got a call from Peter saying, "Listen, you were pretty enthusiastic. Do you still want that job?" And I said, "Yeah," and that was it. It took like 6 months to get there, but I got there in the end. But yeah, like I said, that I don't advise this approach. Don't quit a job unless you've guaranteed to have a job to go to.
Well, I was going to say, you convinced me you got it, telling me the story. So what was Peter like? You kind of said he was a bit, to me, he sounds a bit crazy, but what was he like?
Oh, he was absolutely crazy, but everybody was crazy there.
Mm.
No, he is incredibly charismatic. He is incredibly passionate about games. He is a very clever designer, and up until recently, the single best PR person for a games company you could ever have. Nobody can sell a game like Peter can.
I was going to say, like, God games were really innovative back then. It was just like a total new genre. Did you feel you were on like the cutting edge of something?
All the while, we were at Bullfrog. So when I started there, I think there was 8 of us, right? And every game we did it seemed to be gold dust. Every game we did would always have rave reviews, and we would always be kind of pushing the boundaries of what people thought constituted a game, or the normal approach to making a game. We wouldn't do that. We would try and do something a little bit different, a little bit innovative. So yeah, and a lot of that was it was just the creative energy that we had there, and there was no one person who did all of the things, or there was no one person whose idea it was. Peter was normally the big idea guy. Like he would say it should be set in a jungle with a hamster, and then it would be up to everyone else to go, right, but then the hamster could do this, and this is how we make the hamster move, and this is what we can make the hamster do, and so everybody else would kind of just fill in the blanks from his kind of big idea setting, and the high philosophy stuff would be him, and then we would fill in the details. So the only reason it worked is because he surrounded himself with people who could actually do that.
So you started on PowerMonger, and obviously being a big Populous fan and board game fan, that must have been great to get started on.
It was really exciting. And again, bear in mind that as my first game, I just assumed that this is how all games were made, and it felt very chaotic and very exciting. That's not to say, like looking back on it now, PowerMonger's not actually a particularly good game. There are a lot of restrictions in it, but it was so innovative and so ahead of its time. You could argue that it's the first RTS game.
Yeah.
That it maybe we started that genre too. I mean, I wouldn't, because I don't think we did a particularly good job as far as RTSs go. But it certainly had all the elements of it, and again, the view. Nobody was making games in that kind of view, and just the mechanics, the indirectness, and in those days, Peter had a philosophy on games that he was always trying to explain, which was that just because you stop, the game shouldn't. And he had a very kind of voyeuristic approach to it, i.e., the game world just works. Okay, there's a simulation running and there is something happening in the game. The game exists whether you're there or not, and you can poke it with a stick, or you can walk away, or you can just sit on top of a hill and watch what happens. And all of those things are viable. All of those things are entertaining. And I think that's something that we really kind of embraced, certainly in the early titles.
Well, you worked on Theme Park, right? That was a groundbreaking game, and was it kind of a hard proposition? Essentially being a business game. Did people think it would be successful?
I worked on Theme Park in so much as that one of the icons is mine. I drew the little light bulb when there's an invention, and we played around with it a bit at the start. Prior to Theme Park, every game that we did, the whole company would work on it, and everybody would get buy-in, and everyone was really excited about. Theme Park was the first game that we did that at the point where Peter says, I've got an idea for a game, it's Theme Park, we all went, huh? And not many people got it or saw the point in it. The other thing was, of course, that me and Sean were doing Syndicate at the time as well, which was an altogether more exciting prospect for me. There was certainly some sort of trepidation behind Theme Park, and we didn't know if it would be right. But Peter kind of got this sort of blinkered, no, I can see this. And most of us couldn't. But I'm happy to say that he was proved 100% right by the end of it, So I didn't do that much on Theme Park because, like I said, we were finishing off Syndicate, and I think that we were beginning to move on to Magic Carpet, or Populous Village as it was called at the start, which was basically Glenn making a 3D engine and trying to recreate Populous again in 3D.
So with Theme Park, it was originally going to include a multiplayer mode. Do you know why that was dropped?
I don't know what else you would do. I don't know what you would do in it. There's a finite amount of space, so you could compete for the terrain. There was multiplayer in so much as we would all be... By the time we did Theme Hospital had a multiplayer component in so much as you could get it to save your scores onto a central server and all compete that way. But that was about it. So the same is true of Theme Park. I don't think again, as a departure from all the games that went before it, I don't think we were ever building it as a multiplayer game first.
I was going to say, I played a lot of Theme Park, and when I read that question, then I was just a little bit like, I can't imagine how that would have worked at all.
I don't know, but also equally, I wouldn't put it past Peter. I'm sure there's something there that you could absolutely do. And having played the likes of, Transport Tycoon, stuff like that, multiplayer, they're amazing. So
yeah, maybe like trying to bankrupt the other theme park or steal their resources or something might work.
These days, like you could quite easily do a co-op theme park, and that would be awesome too.
What did they want to improve in Populous 2 then, and what were the big changes?
So Populous 2 did several things differently to the first. The first thing it did was we lost the restriction of only one unit on a tile at any one time, which was quite exciting. We could now have multiple people on a tile. We went to town with the effects. Like we went up from, 8 effects in the first one to about 40 odd in the second, which in hindsight was a terrible mistake, because there was just too much stuff. But basically, the engine was improved. We had an actual graphic artist making the graphics, which was a lovely departure. But other than that, like the functionality was broadly the same. We did also then experiment more with the ideas of combinations of effects. So certain effects would work really well with certain other effects, to varying degrees of success. But I think we got a lot of things wrong with Populous 2. I think it had the potential to be a better game. It was a better engine. We knew much more about what we were doing, but we made too many little mistakes along the way, I think. And the chief of which was overwhelming the player with godly effects to do.
So let's talk about Syndicate. Syndicate was an amazing title. Where did that concept come from, and what was it like working on that game?
Syndicate is the answer to the question, what was your favourite game to work on, right? I had such a good time making Syndicate. So when it started, it was this sort of 2D isometric view scrolly game on the Amiga.
Yeah.
But when we pivoted to when we made the decision, look, this is going to be our first PC title, then it became the 3D isometric, which in and of itself was a big undertaking. Like the amount of very, very bespoke code that Sean and Glenn had to write to even get this thing feasible was just ridiculous. I can remember the first meeting we had when we were talking about it, and it was in Pizza Hut in Guildford. And it was literally back of a napkin stuff, like people were writing stuff down on the back of the napkin. And that's certainly where the Persuadatron came out, the idea of having these crowds of people, like the idea that we were going to simulate a city and have people running around the city doing their own thing. That was a given almost from the start. Because again, like I said, it fitted with our ethos of the world just keeps going no matter what, and we knew we'd have to do some kind of traffic thing, and there were lots of plans for actually, so like in PowerMonger, where the individual units do have a house, they live at this house and they have a job, so they go and tend the fields, or they go and look after sheep, or they go fishing. We were going to do all of that and expand all of that out into a city. Ultimately, we never ended up doing that, but it certainly we gave the impression that the city was fully functional and alive. Then we just started talking about all the cool different weapons we could have, and like Paul, who's the art director, the lead artist at the time, he had a big thing for Blade Runner, so a lot of the aesthetic was all down to Sid Mead's stuff, and the idea that I mean, it's hard to tell looking at a screenshot, but the idea is that the whole thing takes place at night, but the ground is all kind of yellow because of the street lights, but then when you look up the buildings, they're all black and in the darkness of the night, and then we would have all these billboards and the flying airship and hover cars and what have you. So it was all sort of very highly Blade Runner influenced, but the idea that you would then have this living, breathing city that you run around with your units, who again you didn't have total control of. It's not like you're moving them around with a joystick. You were instructing them where they could go, but because of the way you would alter the drugs in their head, they would change the way that they walked there. And again, that system was never fully realized. Like it was pretty basic in the end because we had to make it simple enough for people to understand. But it still plays quite a heavy part in the game. And there are lots and lots of tactics to do with how you would set your people up for certain engagements, especially multiplayer again.
And that's still very kind of board gamey and Dungeons and Dragons, having a team of 4 that you then kind of go out with and do different things. Regarding the level design, how tricky was it dealing with like the multiple levels that you had and all the walkways and kind of, making the AI so that it could actually go around these things and have a decent path?
So to start with, all of the tools that we'd built were on the Amiga, and so I would have to build the environments on the Amiga, and then I could bring them into the PC and actually start building the missions there. So and also all of the environments were made out of 4x4 by, I think they were 8 blocks high chunks, and I could only edit a 4x4 by 8 chunk at any one time, so I was having to kind of piece together all these different things. So it was quite a lengthy process to construct the cities themselves. Then I had to populate the cities. That was relatively simple in terms of the people, but in terms of placing all the things like the windows that you could shoot out, or the lampposts, or the cars driving around, that was quite cumbersome. And then the AI, the navigation thing, was an immense challenge, and Sean did a bang-up job because this predates A-Star really being a thing in the industry or anything. So there were all sorts of different solutions because in Populous, I believe the way, and in PowerMonger, I believe the way the AI would work was the little guy would walk along until he hit something he couldn't get past, i.e. the water. Then he would turn left and he would walk along and basically stick out his right arm and try and wall hug left to get around things. And that didn't work in Syndicate because of the topography, like you say, all the different walkways. So we ended up we would mark the beginnings and ends of walkways. Anywhere that went up a ramp into a walkway would have a little invisible node placed at the bottom of it saying, look, from here you can get to this other piece, and from here. So we kind of built out a sort of navigation tree like that ultimately, but it took us a long while to get there, and that was one of the absolute major challenges. Funnily enough, one of the other challenges was processing where you'd actually clicked, and for the longest time you would have to click where you wanted them to go, but at the very ground level. So if you wanted them to go up onto a walkway, you were clicking somewhere beneath the walkway by an arbitrary amount, and that was absolutely horrific. So, but when we got the proper accurate clicking in, that was an absolute godsend. It was also like at the start of the game as well. It was also you had controlled eight guys. You had a squad of 8 men, not 4, but only me and Sean could actually play that. So we ended up having to pare that down.
So the free roaming and the full exploration of the map was, unseen at that level before. How did you fit it all in?
The hardest part was getting it to run at any kind of frame rate. And for that, we were doing very clever things about how we would update the screen and the bits that we would draw and the bits that we couldn't redraw. Because the other thing was, as well as the move to PC, this was one of the first PC games to do it in their nominal high-res mode. Most people were doing it in kind of MCGA, the 256 color modes, but that was quite low res, whereas this one, Syndicate's actually made in 16 colors. But because of the resolution and the fact that we had some really awesome artists, means that most people don't realize that was the case. But yeah, there were lots and lots of technical challenges about actually getting that running on the hardware back then.
What was your favorite level? And you're right about the technical challenges, because some of those later levels on the Amiga, when it got really crazy, it would be a huge slowdown.
It's fair to say that the poor Amiga wasn't quite up to the task. Now, Disky, the guy who did the Amiga conversion, did a bang-up job, but there was no way a standard Amiga was going to be able to run that. I think it works fine on an A1200, but on an A500, you were always going to be on a hiding to nothing. They just didn't have the power of the PC. As for my favourite level, I can't remember the name of it, but there was one where you were trying to assassinate a guy on the steps of the town hall, just because that always got a really good reaction from people, because it was one of the best illustrations of how we would make the population feel alive, because they're all kind of standing around in a big ring, but as soon as he gets shot or as soon as somebody gets out a gun, they all scream and run away. And I think that was a lovely moment. People normally come up to me, though, and give me grief about the Atlantic Accelerator because it was way too hard.
So American Revolt was like a piece of DLC, and it made a lot of great improvements. What was the aim there with that?
The aim of American Revolt was me putting one over on the guy who still worked at Ultima, who was complaining that Syndicate was too easy. And so I made American Revolt just stupidly hard. American Revolt was a terribly bad idea. Oh no, it was a great idea, and we should have done it, but it was balanced for me and nobody else. And even then, I think I went back to it 10 years later or something and tried playing it, and I couldn't play it because it relied so heavily on sort of crackerjack timing and learning what was about to kill you. So it was a horrible thing. But when we did the original, the plan was always there were 50 territories in the world, and there were going to be 3 missions on each. So there was going to be a mission where you take over the territory, a mission where you defend the territory against somebody else, and a mission where you go and retake the territory once it's been captured by somebody else. But that was too many missions, and we realized pretty soon that we weren't going to be able to do all of those, so we ended up paring it down to just 1 mission per territory. So American Revolt was going to be let's have another go at putting more missions into these places.
What was there a plan for a Syndicate 2? And I know Syndicate Wars came later, and you're not the biggest fan of it. To be honest, I'm not either, just because of all the 3D and the camera angles and stuff. But inside Bullfrog, was there a push for kind of a number 2, but based on the original engine?
At that point, we were still not really doing sequels. I know, we'd done Populous 2 by then, and I know a lot of people thought that PowerMonger was a sequel as well, but we weren't really into it. We was always coming, what else can we do? What's the next thing? And then we moved on to Magic Carpet, and that was cool. But yeah, there was definitely a plan for Syndicate 3, to the extent that when Sean came back to Bullfrog, and so this is after Peter's left. So Sean came back to Bullfrog, and I was at a loose end, and he said, listen, look, let's get together and let's make Syndicate 3. And we started speccing it out to kind of fix the issues that we saw with Syndicate Wars. To be honest with you, the only stuff that I didn't like in Syndicate Wars, I didn't particularly like the low-res nature compared to the first one, but it had to be done like that to get the polygon stuff in, which was okay. But it was just that as it was built as a PlayStation title, or with that in mind, the whole thing had to be played on a joypad, which meant that It was no longer about moving my individual guys and navigating the city as a squad, because like the way I used to play it was I would have one guy out front, two guys who would go from cover to cover with the miniguns, and then one guy at the back with either the Gauss gun or the laser, like bringing up the rear as a support guy. And I loved that kind of formation aspect of it, and add the cadence of just instructing individual units to do that. And the move to joypad meant you couldn't do that, so they had to basically just move around in group mode the whole time. So it felt more like just an arcade game to me. So that's why I didn't like it as much.
Yeah, I love the storyline and stuff. I thought, like, you know, the bombs in there and like the Church of Epoch and stuff like that was really, really good fun as well. So yeah, it had some really good elements, but for me, it was just a bit tough, wasn't it? With the camera angles and all the kind of playing with a gamepad, like you said.
The storyline was all down to, at that point, we'd hired a guy called Sean Masterson, and he used to be the editor of White Dwarf, and he's what we would call nowadays a narrative designer. Like, all he cares about is the big story, which is why, again, the briefings in the original Syndicate, and in fact all text in Bullfrog games prior to Magic Carpet, were written by me. And the briefings there was almost a game in the briefings as well. Like in the original Syndicate, you'd buy one level of briefing and it would be a paragraph telling you what you had to do. Then you could buy extra information which might tell you where to do it. And then you could buy even more information which would be, and here's some hints about how you might achieve that. In Syndicate Wars, what you got was like a mini novella with each mission. It would be paragraphs and paragraphs of text and wonderful exposition and all of this stuff that nobody actually cared about because they just wanted to know who's the guy I'm supposed to shoot. And you didn't find that out until you tabbed over 3 pages or something. So it was, for a lot of people in the office, I think it was far too wordy. Clever words, nice words, flowery words, but far too many of.
So you worked on Magic Carpet, you mentioned there, and I've got a lot of fun memories with it. I remember my brother showing it me when we first got a PlayStation, and it blew my mind. What was it like, showing off Magic Carpet? Did people's jaws hit the floor?
Absolutely. Again, it was something nobody had seen this kind of thing before. The way I always liken it is by then we were developing a bit of a reputation. Like, again, everything we kind of tried worked out to some extent. Like the games would always be critically very, very well received indeed. While the bitmaps were cooler, I think we were quirkier, and people liked our stuff. And we had I think a wider variety to our games. There were a bunch of people making flight sims, like the Simis guys and the people who did like Terracide and stuff like that. And I think they thought they were safe. And so when they got wind of this thing that we were doing and started seeing the images coming out of this free roaming landscape and you flying around on it, I think they started getting scared as well. And we loved that. We loved the idea that, no genre was safe from us. We will make a game in any genre, and we will make it fun, and we will make it more interesting than anything you, a specialist in that genre, could possibly do. So that was really, really exciting. And I do remember taking a PC down to Future in Bath because I was going to demo Magic Carpet. Me being one of the only people that Peter would actually let talk to the press, because he didn't trust anyone to do it with the correct amount of passion and enthusiasm. So I went down there with Kathy Campos, our PR lady at the time, and we had to bring our own machine because, this was a Pentium 90 and nobody had those and it needed that much power to run. So yeah, we had to bring our own machine, set it all up, and she was like, make it run really fast. And I'm like, yeah, you have absolutely no idea how computers work, do you? But yeah, when we showed it to the magazine, and they were gobsmacked because, again, they hadn't seen anything like this before.
For years, we were kind of playing around with like voxel engines and stuff on the Amiga, but they were in these tiny little windows and stuff. How important was level design kind of being placed on top of that engine and making it fun and interesting?
Very. That's your interface to the user, and you can have the best tech in the world, or you can have the flashiest graphics or anything like that, but if they put together a shonky level, you're in a lot of trouble. So for the longest time, again, it was just me building the levels. Like, I built all the levels in PowerMonger. The levels in Populous don't really count because they were just some random numbers in a text file. But yeah, the crafting the Syndicate missions, crafting the Magic Carpet missions, that was me and Sean Masterson, and I think then Barry Mead came on as well. And they were crafted. But I think the problem that existed in those days as well was that building the engine was only half of the battle. And it's easy saying, oh, and then you just build some levels for it. But somebody had to make the level editor as well. So the amount of work that went into actually producing one of these levels, and there's no, third-party engines or anything like that in those days. So you had to do absolutely all of the work, and hardly any of it would carry over to the next project. You were always starting again from scratch. But yeah, I mean, essentially my first role was a level designer, and it's something I always loved doing. I loved creating the missions in that.
So Magic Carpet obviously came out on quite a few systems, but it never made its way to the Amiga. Why was that?
Because the Amiga can't do that many polygons, certainly not textures.
I really didn't want to ask that question, but...
it kind of answers itself. I do remember there were screenshots, though, at one point.
There weren't. No,
I'm not going to lie, Ravi wrote these questions, and I was embarrassed to ask that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Somebody we may have made up some screenshots and like dial it down to 16 colors or what have you. But no, there was never anything. There was never any real thought that the Amiga would be able to do any of this. And let me say, like, I loved the Amiga. Like, it's the thing that got me my break in the industry. I played some absolutely wonderful games on it for 4 or 5 years. But then PCs came out, or PCs started hitting their stride, and that was it. There was no looking back up from that point.
And Gene Wars used the Magic Carpet engine. Like, how easy was it to adapt that engine?
Again, that's a very common, I want to say misconception, except it isn't really. It is rooted in an amount of truth. That basically, from Magic Carpet onwards, everything used the Magic Carpet engine, right? And that's not strictly true. Everything used kind of Glenn's polygonal thing, and everything was pretty much based on height fields, but each engine was bespoke. It would start with Glenn's Magic Carpet as a base, or whatever the latest iteration of it was as a base. But yeah, it would be different. So the landscape is very Magic Carpety, but everything else was more bespoke. In fact, it used a sprite engine similar to the one that we did in Populous 2 that would later be even further refined for Theme Hospital. But yeah, the landscape ended up being, the landscape started out as a hexagonal version of Populous, sort of landscape blocks and everything. But this kind of predates even PowerMonger. The very first version of Gene Wars was actually a game called Biosphere that was done by a very good friend of mine, Richard Reed, and he'd sent it in to EA. No, sorry, I think he'd sent it into EA. They said they weren't interested, but the disc ended up on my desk, and Peter was like, "Can you take a look at this game and tell me if you think it's any good?" And I absolutely loved it. I said, "Look, this thing's brilliant. It's really, really nice." It was about a group of alien planetary specialists who had to terraform planets for money. So, the big planet owners would come along and say, we want a planet that's got this much biomass on it, and the atmosphere is this, and it's got this much land, and these particular creatures on it. Can you help? And then you would send these specialists in with seeds and livestock, and you would have to make a functioning ecosystem. And I absolutely loved it. And then we hired Richard, we got him in, and for many, many years we tried to make that game, but we weren't really getting anywhere with it. We had some really cool stuff, but it wasn't really getting anywhere until eventually Sean was parachuted in as by then Sean had this reputation of being the closer. If you wanted a game finished and shipped, you put Sean in charge of the project. And we had all been playing an awful lot of CNC. And he was like, let's make that. We'll make an RTS, but we'll use the animals and stuff like that as our units instead. And so that's how Gene Wars eventually hit the shelves.
So Dungeon Keeper took God Gaming to the next level. What was your reaction the first time you tried that game?
So Dungeon Keeper, again, is an interesting one, in that at the start, it was basically Simon and Dean Carter, who are big, like, role-playing game fans, and they were making a more traditional role-playing game, because all we really knew about Dungeon Keeper was, again, Peter's big idea of let's be the bad guy. And that was the direction that all anybody had at the start of the project. So they'd made this thing where you were building a dungeon. So you were placing down the shape of rooms, and your dungeon would be populated by bad things. It was multiplayer. You would go and raid other people's dungeons, and the heroes would come in and start smashing your dungeon up. And it was very in-depth, and it was quite complex. And then Peter came back and said, no, this isn't working. This is too tricky. This is too complex. And he scrapped the whole lot and started again from scratch. And he wrote basically a 2D version of Dungeon Keeper, which is the one that we know today, i.e. all I'm doing is I'm tagging gold, and I'm tagging areas to dig out, that level of granularity, rather than the blueprint system that we had previously. So if anybody wonders why Dungeon Keeper took so long, it's because, in a sense, we actually wrote it twice. Like, Dean and Simon almost finished this game, and then Peter came in and said, no, we'll start again. But it worked. It worked again. I think he was justified, because, again, the final game was so well received, and I don't think it would have been had we stuck with what it was that we were trying to make.
With the studio kind of growing then, and EA starting to get involved, how big did the teams get to? And how come Dungeon Keeper 2 was your last project there?
So by the time you get to, like, most of the teams were like 10 to 15 people at around that sort of time. But by the time you get to Dungeon Keeper 2, I think it was like closer to 50, 60 people. Just on the dev team, and that isn't even going into like the QA department, the marketing department, and the production side of things from EA and all sorts of stuff. So the teams got way big. I mean, it's nothing to what team sizes are nowadays, but again, like I said, coming from when there was 8 of us in the whole company and we would all work on one game, to then being this kind of much smaller cog in a huge machine was quite jarring. But the reason it was my last project, so I only ended up on Dungeon Keeper 2 because, again, just prior to that, like I said, Sean had said, hey, look, let's go make Syndicate 3. And I was like, yes. So it was just me and him, and we was batting around some ideas for Syndicate 3. And then Dungeon Keeper 2 was in a bit of a problem, was as with many of the projects there, they were losing their way a bit. So they parachuted Sean in again. They said, look, Sean, can you come and fix this? And he said, yeah, sure, Alex, come with me. And so that's how I ended up on the project. It wasn't something I particularly wanted to do. I enjoyed it, and I thought it was a good game. And I thought, again, we improved on so many things that I felt was missing in the original, or that were lacking, areas that were lacking in the original. Again, we shot ourselves in the foot with some of the decisions we made, but overall, I thought it was a better game. But by the end of it, or towards the end of it, I was just getting too frustrated with the decisions that were being made higher up. The company had become a lot more corporate, because now it was really, really EA, and they were getting involved a lot more. They were having to get involved a lot more because we were shooting ourselves in the foot, or we were being crazy and creative, but not actually producing anything worthwhile. And these guys were there to balance the books and ensure that we did actually ship something of a quality by when we said we were going to do so. And to be honest, we never did that. We would never ship stuff on time because we were just too excited about the games, or we got carried away with things, or we were just messing around, So that's why I ended up leaving, because it changed. And by then as well, there were a lot of people, like at the point where I left, I think I was the second longest serving person there. I think there was only one guy who had been at Bullfrog before me left. So my mates had gone, everyone had gone and set up their own little companies, and everyone was still in Guildford, we still saw them all, but they were off doing their own thing. And I thought that sounded quite exciting.
Yeah, essentially that it kind of got drained out of people until Peter Molyneux left himself as well. And you worked with Lost Toys Inc. as well, which was Glenn Corpus and a few other Bullfroggers as well. How was your time there?
So every studio that was founded out of the ashes of Bullfrog, everybody who left Bullfrog to start up a studio did it for exactly the same reason, and that was, we want to recreate what we had. We want to go back to the air quotes good old days, right? Peter did it and has done it a number of times. Disky and Finn and Guy and Gary, who went to do Muckyfoot, they did it for that exact reason. And Glenn, Darren, and Jez did exactly the same thing with Lost Toys. It's like, look, let's just try and get it back to how it was. We're going to have a small team. Everybody works on the same game. Everybody knows each other. Everybody knows everybody's names. And we're going to have a lot of fun making these interesting titles. So that was the appeal to me. And at the start of Lost Toys, it really was that. And in fact, right up to the end, it really was that. We had some lovely banter. I think by and large everybody got on really, really well with each other. We had some amazingly talented people there, and not just ex Bullfrog people or anything like that. We got some categorically the most talented programmers I have ever worked with there as well, and it was just really, really good fun. But then it's just the timing was bad because it was the great indie crash of the early 2000s where all of these companies just started going to the wall. Then that was the problem. That's why Lost Toys went down as well. We just kind of all got caught up in that, and some bad luck with trying to get publishers for the Stunt Car Racer game, which we thought the Stunt Car Racer game was going to be brilliant, and it was great fun, like really, really good fun to play. Again, we'd got a really decent engine. It was great fun building the roller coaster tracks. The physics was really good. We have Jeff Crammond involved, who's an absolute legend. We thought this is going to be amazing, and how could we possibly fail? And the answer is yes, of course you can possibly fail if no publisher wants to pick you up. So,
and amazingly, kind of that was going to be the last title, wasn't it? Before you guys ran out of cash. Amazingly, there's a fan remake at the moment of a Stunt Car Racer that's doing the rounds.
Yeah, there's a guy on Twitter who every now and again he'll ping us saying, "Have you got the footage of the stuff that you used to have? Have you got any of the source code? Does it still compile? Can I have a look?" And we're like, I don't really know. No, I don't think any of those computers exist anymore, and we would never be able to get any of that up and running. Especially not like because at the point where the company went belly under, all of those assets were then put up for auction, and we're having to sell off these machines to cover the creditors and all sorts. So what happened to them, I've got absolutely no idea. But I don't think you'd ever be able to get any of it going.
Yeah, there's one fan made one called Stunt Car Mania at the moment. That seems to be going out. So maybe you could check that out and kind of see what they've done.
I really enjoyed aspects of that game, but then there were again some decisions were being made that just seemed utterly crazy at the time, and sort of outside our sphere of control. So yeah, I'd love to do it again. I'd love to have another crack at that kind of thing, at like physics-based racing game on roller coasters. I mean, come on, that's an easy sell, right?
Totally,
look at all the parkour stuff in GTA, right?
And just chuck it in VR, and then you've got.
Don't get me started on VR. Look, we're coming up on an hour here. It's not the retro 2 hours, is it? No.
Right. Well, I think I'll end it there before we get too deep into other subjects. But it's just been fantastic talking with you, Alex, about Bullfrog, and it's such a legendary company. What are you up to nowadays?
So at the moment, I'm working for Splash Damage. Over in Bromley on an unannounced project, which is quite exciting actually. They seem like a really nice bunch of guys. They seem to really know their onions, and it's nice to be sort of back in the big time. We were doing the indie thing for a while, but the indie thing is incredibly brutal, ridiculously hard, especially if you're trying to do it on mobile as well. So I'm enjoying my time at Splash Damage, not least of which because it's a regular paycheck, which is something that I haven't seen for the last 5 years. So yeah, it's very exciting for me.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.